Talk about how you talk to your consumers, how, this whole experience, how do you as a marketer really interact with your consumers?
Well, I think there's a couple things. One is it is a visceral thing. There's not many products one buys that actually you live in, right? I mean, so a couple things that we do is one is there is an emotional play. There's some other great brands. You own one, right? And there's some of those things about the visceralness about it. What do you feel like when you get in the car? How do you feel? How does it play out? The challenge is you have those emotional pieces, and then the rest of the industry is talking about it, technology. How do you talk to the customer? The challenge we have is keeping them alive while they're reading their phones. So some of the stuff that we're trying, and the challenge is to integrate those two experiences. That's really the big challenge. How do you bring, the constant access in the vehicle while you're still enjoying the driving? And we haven't gotten that solved yet, right? I mean, we're trying to figure out, can we do it on our own? We have to partner. So our whole industry is really shifting about how we create that relationship between the branding and also the phones.
You've got consumers in the sense that you have users of Facebook, people, this is a community, yada, yada, yada. But everybody else who has customers interacts with Facebook to reach their customers. Talk about that aspect of the customer relationship.
So I think for that aspect, it's leaning on what I was just mentioning in terms of some of the social values and how you can connect with those consumers. I've heard in the last panel a little bit about sort of the elevated sense for Gen Zers, or whatever you want to call them, alphas, and go on and on and on. The way that they're connecting with devices is completely different. It's nascent to them. They were born into that process. I have 7-year-old twins, one of which has already asked me when he's going to get his first phone. It's kind of ridiculous. But I think ultimately for them, it's so nice to them. Multitasking is actually sort of commonplace for them. It's just, it's common nature. They've become the best channel planners that exists in the world, right? Because they just know exactly how to divert their attention to where they need to divert it, wherever provides value. And I think one of the biggest components is, as a brand, building a relationship, and this is very much the way that we look at it, is you're building a long-term relationship. I think Jeff from American Express was talking about it this morning. Just building that long-term relationship with your consumer is so vital in today's marketplace. We talk about loyalty and sort of what that actually looks like. It looks like building a meaningful relationship with them, and what you need to do in some of those cases is actually stand for something, have values, a value proposition as a brand that you then express to your consumers, and you hope to make that connection, because then that sort of drives those long-term connections with those consumers.
So there's this idea about, that there are things that we are massively connected on. When you look around the world, a Chinese teenager and a British teenager and an American teenager, they've all got their version of TikTok or Instagram or WhatsApp, and there are things that they are doing that are very, very similar. I was literally sitting with a 10-year-old from Jamaica and an 11-year-old from White Bear Lake, Minnesota, and they were sharing their favorite quotes around the Marvel universe, about what's going on with Iron Man and Tony Stark and all that sort of stuff. So they've got things that are culturally completely the same. And then when they're sharing their life experiences about, well, I asked them, do you eat cereal? The kid from Jamaica was like, yeah, absolutely. It's the thing that we eat most. And the kid from White Bear Lake, Minnesota, where I was living, was like, no, we don't eat cereal because, we're gluten-free, or whatever it was that they were saying. So there are things that in their infrastructure and their cultural environment are different, but a lot of the behaviors and technologies and cultural means are coming together. By the way, in 1980, I remember we were all part of the MTV generation, and everybody liked the same pop music. So what was true then is even more true now, and it makes it super interesting for marketing, because you want to exploit the differences and exploit the similarities.
Where is Facebook going for the next 20 years? What's the next iteration of Facebook? We won't tell anyone.
As long as I've got everybody's word. I think, you're seeing a lot of it already. What we're concentrating on mainly is community. And I know that may sound like a cop-out answer, because it is a giant community. But more of these sort of micro-communities that are existing within our platform, and how those micro-communities and more private communities, right, I think are becoming more and more existent. When you guys became first part of Facebook, how many friends did you accept every friend request you got? There was some people that basically got on Facebook and was just like, I'm going to friend everybody, the entire world. I'm just going to be friends with everybody. And then you started pruning those friends over time, and really sort of fine-tuning your community and fine-tuning the people who you really wanted to interact with and who, more importantly, you wanted to interact with the content that you were sharing. It all becomes so important for you to be making sure that the audience that you're providing that feedback is, I'm a brand, you're all brands of your own, that you're projecting yourselves out there within this sort of platform. And so being able to share within a good community of people who are interested in the Marvel universe and can sort of really start sharing ideas of like what's going to be the next iteration. Spider-Man actually got saved and it's actually now part of the Marvel universe. It's amazing. Maybe we'll see sort of a continuation of that storyline. All of those pieces become sort of interesting and important interactions. And what we're looking at specifically are opportunities like Pantene sort of had this amazing campaign in Thailand where they integrated sort of with hair care, trying to understand like their community themselves, like who's most interested in hair care, potentially one microgroup within Thailand, and it was trans people. So they actually reached out and did a whole campaign around it, included people, their first ever trans brand ambassador, and it all came from the insights that they were able to derive from the building of a community and helping understand that audience even better. So I think to me there's a tremendous amount of power in understanding the power of community.
You know, Ivan, you have talked about return on investment in marketing, but you've made it a little shift, and you talk about it in terms of return on emotion and the importance of emotion in branding and connecting with the consumer. What, you know, talk about the dimensions of emotion, and then what does this ROE, return on emotion, mean to you?
So I think there's a buzzword in marketing at the moment about experience. And
they don't know the buzzwords because they're not all in marketing. It's
yeah, but they're all on Facebook, so they've probably heard it. So this idea about experience and how that's a new thing, actually that's rubbish. It's been the thing that brand builders have done for the last 100 years. Surround the product with a set of emotional and physical experiences that make the product worth more to the consumer than the product itself, okay? So that's what we're all in the business and have always been in the business doing. So those emotional experiences are a massive layer and they're going to continue to be really important. The thing that's shifting is those experiences are happening more often, but more often in more places, more virtually. They're less controlled by the brand than they ever used to be, and they're also a little more measurable through things like Facebook, and we're getting much closer to knowing which emotion you want with your Cheerios that might be different than mine. And so this return on emotion, how we build brands and how we still create things that are of value in the long term, it is a function of the experience in the Honda, or whether or not Instagram has got the algorithm right to send me things only that I'm interested in. That returns value in the long term. If you get the experience wrong in the short term, you can lose a customer almost immediately. So this return on the end-to-end experience, yes, it's about the crunch of the bite of a Nature Valley bar, but at the other hand, it's also the experience of seeing on Instagram a friend post a photograph of a wrapper of a Nature Valley bar on a mountain trail, okay? So how do we start looking at the end-to-end experience, understand the emotions that are at play that we can affect at each point in that journey, and then start optimizing them for how we spend $1 to get more than $1 back.
But Generation Alpha, are they going to be different?
So I think we're seeing an augmentation of a lot of the things that we've seen through millennials, right? Millennials have been perceived as this very, very different group, and I'm kind of like a borderline millennial sort of Xer. And there's subgroups within those generations that I think we need to pay attention to as well. There's things that sort of carte blanche are important to Zers, to Xers, to all of those audiences, which is inclusion. So seeing inclusion in advertising and marketing is becoming more and more relevant and more important. I've done a study in the past around looking at second generation plus Hispanics. And so that would be like my children and their experience in America and how they like what their perceptions are of the brands that are speaking to them. Their expectations are very different, right? They want a communication, a two-way communication, and they also want to be included. They want to see themselves in the messaging that they receive so that they feel included within sort of whatever it is that product or experience is being sold to them. But I think experiences are like incredibly vital, important piece of the equation. And that's going to continue.
I actually think Gen Alpha are going to be very different. Mm-hmm. So we all know about, we've all got 6 senses, yeah? Right, actually you don't, you have 13 apparently, right? And one of the ways that we do marketing is appeal to those senses. I think Gen Alpha are going to see their phone as their 7th sense or their 14th. It will be a thing that is intimately connected to them, and I don't just mean a thing, the phone, all the technology is going to connect them to the world. So think augmented reality and virtual reality. They will navigate the world, and the world where we sell a car or we meet a friend or we eat a bowl of Cheerios is going to be augmented by the technology that puts a layer over the top of it, that a Gen Alpha person is going to expect to be able to just go, hey, what's in that Cheerios bowl? Hey, you know, how much is that costing at Walmart versus somewhere else? Hey, why doesn't 7 of us get together and right now negotiate with Honda dealers for the best deal on a car? They'll use this technology seamlessly as a sense with which they navigate the world. So I think we're about to have a massive shift.
Can we talk about brand purpose and corporate social responsibility and how brands like Patagonia have quadrupled their revenues over the past 10 years by taking very public stands on public lands? Is that a blip, or in 2025 it's like core to brand building?
Anyone want to take it?
I'll take it. It's an interesting thing. For Honda, we have a long and strong philosophy about doing the right thing. And really, it sounds rather trite, but it's really true about being a company that society wants to exist. So if you watch our airbag response, we have the highest completion rates at any OEM. So we do the right thing. What we found, though, is because of this the situation now where everybody talks about everything, we've done it because it was a giving back. We owe something back to the community for being successful. But what we found now with some of the research is that we have to be more open about it, where in past we thought we were doing that for our self-benefit, right? So it's sort of not really correct. And now what we're recognizing is that younger people, millennials, Gen Z, they want to hear that. And the scary thing is if you don't talk about it, the research is starting to say is if you're not talking about it, maybe you're hiding something. So it's really a shift about being much more open about those activities. And we have to learn that.
I think to that point, though, there's the touch points, every single touch point that you have with consumers, especially younger consumers, matters. And it takes a level of gravity that maybe didn't exist before. Just for that very reason, right? Because you can really share those experiences and become either a brand ambassador or brand attractor out into the world. And those sort of the diffusion of influence that exists in today's marketplace, where we will be influenced in terms of our purchases by a number of different sources, becomes sort of augments that as well. So I'd say in terms of the future of data privacy, it's hard to tell. There's so many moving pieces in terms of what's going to happen next year in the elections, what's going to happen with and around the world, right? There's so much movement. We were just talking about that this morning. The ambassador, I thought, was talking about it really interestingly. In terms of perception of data and data privacy amongst consumers themselves, you can find lots of research that talks about how younger consumers understand the data value exchange. And will sort of, what they're really looking for more than anything else is an additive experience to their life. Yeah. And that additive experience comes through interactions with us, or personalized interactions, or interactions offline as well that are sort of just more meaningful. Because again, the weight behind these touch points has taken a higher level of gravity. So those touch points need to be relevant and personalized to them.
Ivan.
So I think this is a huge thing for marketing. I think this idea that we could market one-on-one to 1 billion people in a touch of a button is kind of interesting. I don't know whether it's economically feasible. I actually think that two things are going to happen to join together what you said. Number one, we want more transparency. The consumer wants more transparency. Regulators want more transparency. Marketers want more transparency. What is it I'm signing up for when you get the little thing that says, hey, give me some permissions on this app, and I didn't realize that when I click yes, I want to do the conference boards app. Yes, I just suddenly gave you away my estate planning.
Thank you so much, by the way.
I know, it was good. It's not worth much, but you can have it. So a little bit more transparency about what that exchange of value is. But then the value exchange is, all of our lives have been made better through this data. The idea of driving a car, which, by the way, I only learned to do 2 years ago, so I'm a millennial as well, just the last millennial.
There's a movie in that somewhere.
The idea of driving a car without Google Maps or Waze is now an anathema, right? So that data exchange is massive. I'll trade you my location so I know where the traffic jam is. When we start to abuse it, though, and all it takes is one abuse, You know, one thing that goes wrong, it can start to tumble. So self-regulation, good. I think Jeff made a point this morning about regulation, external regulation, better. Communal ecosystem where we both get value, the best.
How do you market in the context of the social good?
Well, I'll join it together with Cheeky's question. I actually think Jeff said it very well this morning. All the companies that have survived actually have had a purpose. You know, it's Jeff Kling last week said something along the lines of, listen, a purpose statement it's not a tagline or a campaign statement. It's the animating force behind why your company and why your employees actually do what they do to return value to stakeholders. So how you market it, number one, it has to be based on a truth that's always been there. Number two, you have to be open to telling it, but more importantly, open to other people telling it on your behalf. So that's when it really gets magical. And number three, you have to stick to it. And I think Yale said this morning, you know, you have to put actions behind it. So there was a great article in the New York Times this weekend about 5 companies with wonderful purpose statements. Spotify, to unleash human creative potential. Lyft and Uber, you know, to transform transportation and make people's lives easier. And he pointed out all of those are really good purpose statements, not entirely sure the company lives up to it, and by the way, their shares have all plummeted. Okay, so you've got to live up to it and you've got to do stuff. And you market it best by doing it and letting other people see it and letting them talk about it.
So I think in terms of, correctly, like in terms of as a platform ourselves, thinking about how social good is incredibly important to build our own brand, but really for our partners as well, giving them sort of the megaphone to be able to share some of the great things that companies do. I mean, you see companies being built on the platform itself by sharing some of the amazing sort of ideas that they have, not just to fulfill a consumer need, but fulfill a consumer's broader sort of social need, right? And I think when you have that mixture, you're able to create sort of some disruption within the industries as well. And you're able to communicate that really efficiently to an audience that's really hungry for it. And when you talk about sort of the differences between alphas and Zers and all these folks, there's a growing sense of that, right? There's a growing sense of purpose and community and social good that's become an expectation. It's not sort of a nice to have. I always sort of talk about McDonald's and the Ronald McDonald House that's existed forever. Knowing that that exists is actually like an amazing thing for the brand itself, but how do they really communicate that out besides sort of some of those TV ads now and then? Now it feels like every single brand should have some of those types of messages out there that really sort of puts what they're doing for the community up front and center.
So we hear a lot about marketing to a developing generations that are coming along, but demographically, China, Japan, U.S., Europe. Huge aging population.
Massive.
So what are your thoughts in terms of this demographic group and business opportunities, or how do you market to them, et cetera, et cetera?
So it's a great question because actually that has been an underserviced group for a very long time. So a lot of, especially the CPG companies, are starting to work out and see this and take real action for the 55 plus. So in the next 5 years, the number of 100-year-olds in North America will double. Right, it's the fastest growing segment of the population in North America is the 65 to 75-year-olds. So, and they've, at the moment, they've actually also sitting on quite a lot of income. So we're starting to think about how you engage those. So go back to the company I worked for last, Coca-Cola. You know, you show an ad of sort of 10 teenage boys kicking a soccer ball around with 10 teenage girls, and the girls winning, obviously, these days, because it's America. The girls on the beach. You know, we used to assume that appealed to little old white men who were thinking that they're still there, kicking that ball around. It's not true. We have to start working out what you know, we talk about pop culture. What does grand pop culture look like? And how do we get into that? So we're starting to think very differentially about the possibility of marketing, the channels for marketing, which doesn't exclude Facebook. So, you know, you all know the data about how Facebook has enabled the older generations. But, you know, I guess we're in this age where our kids are getting older, younger, right? So they want a phone when they're 6. But also, the aging population is staying younger longer. Right. So anybody would not think to look at me that I'm a multiple Ironman triathlete. I lied about that, by the way. I'm not. But this idea that, you know, again, the 45 to 55 group is the largest group that goes for an Ironman triathlon, which after you've done lots of stuff, you run a marathon. So
we're okay. Boomers rule, and we
rule
will
and
for
we're going
life.
there.
That's the right. You heard it here first.
Yeah.